So today I think we're going to be able to finish up the church and science topic. We left off speaking about evolution, and what I'm going to try to leave you with is a balanced view of evolution. I'm not trying to discredit it, nor am I necessarily in favor of it, but hopefully at the end of this lesson you'll kind of be able to make your own conclusions. All right, so we talked about basic principles yesterday, and just kind of a quick review of those. We were talking about these being kind of the four things to keep in the back of our minds as we discuss this kind of general background. But where we left off yesterday is we were going to get into the Cambrian explosion. So we're going to take some time to read about it, and then we'll discuss it. Again, you're not writing these word for word, but just try to understand the main points. Mr. Solomon, please read for us. Yeah.
The Cambrian explosion refers to the great quantity and diversity of life found in what is called the Cambrian layer of the geologic column. Cambrian age, the geologic timescale is dated by scientists being about 540 million years old. It lasted 20 to 25 million years. What is really interesting is not just what is found in this layer, but what is found in the layers above it, and what is not found in the layers under it.
Are you having a little trouble seeing?
Yeah.
Okay, first of all, you should probably get glasses. Do you not have a prescription?
Not mandatorily, but...
Okay, yeah, so you should wear them. And just kind of a little take-home lesson for all of you. It is good to have a prescription, whether it's glasses or contacts, but wear them when necessary. In other words, like if you're in the classroom, watching a movie, driving. But when you get them, don't wear them when not necessary, such as reading. Because what most people don't realize, and I actually know this from experience, because my vision improved, and I'll tell you how I improved it later. But the reason why it got worse is why a lot of people's get worse is because once they get a prescription, well, they start wearing them everywhere. And then if you're trying to accommodate your cornea for long distance vision, but you're looking at something close, you need a stronger and stronger prescription. So just try to avoid that so that you don't make your eyes worse. That being said, though, do use it for when you're looking at something far. Miss Paula, she's Paula, I call her Miss Paula. No, Miss Buchanan, please continue where you left off.
So the Cambrian layer has virtually everything known to man. All major bodies, plants, and enormous varieties of each all coexist in this layer. No evolutionary sequence here. They are all coexisting simultaneously.
Okay, so a couple things to point out. The first is that 20 to 25 million years sounds like a long time, and for us it is. But in geological time, that's actually very quick. Right, so that's the first point. So what we're talking about in the Cambrian explosion is a relatively short period of time. And it is significant that they all exist because, you see, the linear view of evolution, that you had simple organisms, then more and more complex as time went on, is shattered by the Cambrian layer. All right, Ms. Cosgrove, please.
Remarkably, the layers below the Cambrian have practically nothing with regard to fossilized specimens. The few creatures that are found in pre-Cambrian strata are all soft-bodied organisms like worms. So essentially, you have nothing along the lines of organic complexity and diversity pre-Cambrian, and then suddenly everything. But wait, it gets even more interesting. To compound this huge problem, the number of species fossilized in the layers above the Cambrian period gradually decreased with each successive layer. Once you reach the most recent layers, approximately 98% of everything that has ever lived is extinct.
All right. Now that's pretty mind-blowing for two reasons. All right. The first is that you don't have steady progress up to Cambrian. You basically have zero to little progress. Then Cambrian hits, everything's at once. Where's the linear development? And then after that, you'd think, okay, then things are just going to keep on improving, blah, blah, blah. Well, they didn't. They didn't for the most part. Man did. But species, for the most part, didn't improve. They basically just kept going extinct. We don't know why. We just know that this is the case, and this is the geologic record. Ms. Placencia?
The Cambrian explosion cannot be explained by gradual random mutations because it happened so quickly and also because all the phyla were present at once. Second, the fact that most Cambrian species are now extinct is contrary to the notion that random evolution improves species instead of harming them.
Okay, good. Keep going, Tavia.
Conclusion. A reasonable and honest person must conclude from the evidence that the fossil record is diametrically opposed to the predictions of evolutionary theory. It is noteworthy that these conclusions are derived from a geologic time framework that is put forth by scientists' own interpretation of geologic evidence. In fact, the belief that the strata represent different geologic ages is just that, a belief. Nevertheless, it is a belief held among scientists worldwide.
And who first proposed that belief? We learned about it in class. Remember that handouts are part of notes. Who first proposed this idea of geologic layers? Mr. Tran. You got it. Blessed Nicholas Steno. And yet, this is accepted science now, right? No one disputes layers because we keep seeing it confirmed over and over again. But two main things I want you to take home from the Cambrian explosion. The first is that we don't see gradual development. We see simultaneous development. And the second is that we don't see this natural selection played out on a permanent scale, whereas Darwin, or original Darwinism, says that you're just going to get steady improvement because those mutations that are not favorable to the species are going to get weeded out. Well, apparently that didn't happen to 98% of the species. You could say that during the Cambrian era, there was much more diversity of life than there is now. Now, am I saying this or am I bringing up the Cambrian era because I want to shoot down evolution? No, not at all. In fact, Darwin knew about the Cambrian explosion. He didn't quite know how to make sense of it. What I do want to shoot down, though, and I think we should all shoot down, is this idea of random Darwinism. You see, if in pure Darwinism, if mutations are completely random and then get favored or rejected by the environment, then the Cambrian explosion would never have happened. In other words, random Darwinism simply cannot explain the Cambrian explosion for the two reasons that I gave. Which means that if there is evolution, and we have good reason to believe that there is, at least within species, and perhaps between species, it is unreasonable to say that it's completely random. And what the Cambrian layer tells us is that it's also unscientific to say that it's completely random. Just the math doesn't add up. And we should be aware of that because your typical college roommate, Bible basher, is going to think that evolution explains everything. And that person probably doesn't even know what the Cambrian explosion is. Now, whether you accept evolution or not, or maybe you've got a different theory of creation. I already told you guys you can have different theories. But what you do have to accept is the truths of Genesis 1 through 3, which are that God created the human two original parents, and he created them to live with him and for him. And there was a fall, and the fall led to our salvation. These are the basic facts of Genesis. How those happened is completely up to you. In other words, you can look at the science, make your own judgments, and you're free to do so. But you should realize, though, that undirected evolution is not only bad science, but it's not really compatible with creation in Genesis, whereas directed evolution is compatible. I personally believe in directed evolution. I think there's plenty of scientific evidence out there for the development of species, although there still isn't the link between species. But directed evolution means that somehow, in a way that only God understands, the mutations were directed at the right times, in the right places. You know, you might ask, well, why does he make these little directed mutations at the microscopic level where no one can see his work? Because that's how God works. God is glorified when we come to him through faith. In fact, there's more merit in our embracing faith and loving the God we can't see. There's more merit in that than there is in just plain seeing God. Our Lord tells that to St. Thomas. Jesus says, you believe because you've seen me. Blessed are they who have not seen yet have believed. We are the blessed who have not seen yet have believed. So God then hides his craftsmanship by directing these mutations at the genetic level. Did you have a question, Levi?
No,
Oh, okay. Now, what we mean by infused with souls, it's not like you just have some, I don't know, ape and then bang, there's a soul. No, the idea there is that however the human species came about, and maybe God was pleased to make that come about, our physical form, through apes and primates, etc. But at the very first zygote level, right, when Adam was created, if we accept directed evolution, Adam's beginning would have been as a zygote. Well, then at that moment, a human soul would have been there instead of an animal soul. But again, you don't have to accept that theory. It's just a theory. The theory that I choose to accept, you might not choose to accept. But whatever theory you choose to accept, it needs to be compatible with Genesis 1 through 3. That's the main thing. Mr. Tran? If you got what?
So like if God had made the living like
I'm still not hearing you well. A little louder and clearer, please.
so if God had made the domain rulers, what our goal is right now, but could he have given that to
Are you guys getting this? Am I missing something?
No, yeah, I heard it. It sounded.
I'm confused. I heard domain rulers. Did I mishear?
No.
Okay. Is that from a game that I should be aware of?
No.
That's like how God created man. You have dominion over all.
Oh, right. Yeah, okay. So I'm sorry, Johnny, I didn't understand you. So what about that?
But could he have made like us into
Of course. Yeah, that's what I thought was a weird question is actually a really good question. He could have made us into any shape he wanted. In fact, it's even deeper than that. If there are extraterrestrials, which there could be, those are actually humans, because the real definition of human isn't that we have 2 legs, 2 arms, breathe in oxygen, have organic matter and stuff. The definition of human is body, soul, unit, body and souls fused. So maybe there are, I don't know, green blobs on some other planet that think and communicate and are human because they have souls, right? So our form doesn't matter. And by the way, if there were extraterrestrials, that doesn't necessarily mean they sinned. And even if they did and had a savior, it would still be the same savior. The reason for that, as explained by Thomas in the Summa, is that when the second person took on 2 natures, it showed us that any divine person can take on any number of natures. So let's think outside the box a little bit. Let's say there are 10 intelligent races in the entire universe. Just throwing a number out there. We humans, earthbound humans, would be one. Maybe there are 9 others we don't know about. And maybe a couple of them never sinned. Possible. Maybe the rest did sin. Possible also. If they had a savior, it's still going to be the same savior. because there's no limit to how many any person of the Trinity and how many natures any person in the Trinity can take on. And then anytime you have a sharing of natures, you have the same dynamics of salvation that we have with our Lord Jesus Christ. Now, that's all speculation. There's no proof for it, but it's not contradictory to revealed doctrine. Ms. Tariki? You mean if, so let's just hypothetically say there's a race of intelligent beings out there in a distant galaxy who had a beginning like Adam and Eve and they never sinned, then they never sinned. Well, the same way that it would have worked for Adam and Eve. So let's back up and let's say Adam and Eve had never sinned, because God created them not to. It wasn't God's will for them to sin. So if they had never sinned, if there had never been a fall, then Jesus may or may not have become incarnate. Certainly if he had become incarnate, it wouldn't be to save human beings, it would be just for some other reason. But they still could have eventually been granted the grace of the beatific vision. Do you know what I'm saying? Yeah, so there could still have been a heaven for them. All right, evolution remains a theory, not a law. Who can tell me why? What's the reason that there is a reason why we still cannot call it a law? Mr. Scioto. It's not directly observable. Very good. Even if it does become a law, it will not contradict the creation story of Genesis. The facts of Genesis are not going to be changed by anything science tells us. Science may tell us how the things in Genesis happened, but science can never tell us why they happened. Science also will never change the facts of Genesis, that those things happened. Okay, that's important. How is not why. To say that evolution depends only on chance rather than purposeful design is self-contradictory. DNA is complex code and code requires a coder. I, as a computer person, this argument means a lot to me. Because, you know, you look at these phones we take for granted, right? And some of you had 8th grade science. You know, we made some simple games and some of those took like 50, 60 lines of code. We're talking about millions of lines of code in this thing. More processing power and more coding complexity in this phone than in the entire room full of computers in 1969 that made the moon landing happen. We carry this around. But the point is, if DNA is a code that's even more complex than these millions of lines, even more, it is utterly ludicrous to say that all happened by chance. That's as stupid as saying, oh, a phone. I bet you that happened randomly. Oh yeah, If you let a few million years go by, eventually you're going to have a complex phone. It's silly. It's preposterous. Mr. Tran.
Sorry if it's question, but let's say humans like take a tree,
Yeah,
and then by some way turn it into another intelligent being.
okay.
Would that being, would that being be free from original sin, or would we have to baptize it?
So here's a couple things to point out here. What your question implies is that intelligence is creatable, and the problem is it's not. The reason it's not is because intelligence, spirituality, like we talked about the proofs of the human soul in second quarter, that's something that's completely not physical. Therefore, it can never be produced in a lab. Even AI, right? AI is advanced now. We're not even talking about biotech like Johnny's question, but AI is advanced. AI can only mimic human intelligence. It can even mimic creativity. But that mimicry is not the same as a spiritual intelligence that's capable of original and self-conscious thought. Right? We can come up with completely original thoughts, and we're aware of ourselves. This has not been achieved by any AI and never will be, because it's a spiritual quality. All right, so basically, Johnny, if biotech were so advanced, let's say we could clone human beings. Well, cloning human beings, first of all, it hasn't been done, even though they've tried. But let's say it could be done on a physical level. You're still not going to have a soul there. So what will you have? You'll either have a weird animal clone, like I cloned Justin, and he looks like Justin, but it's an animal. So that could happen. Or God could step in and actually create a soul directly in that clone. We don't know what would happen. That's all hypothetical. But either way, that's not the same as a soul being produced by human beings in a lab.
While maybe, it's not close enough to have humans, stuff that God needs to be.
Sure, that's possible, right?
But would that thing still need?
If it is intelligent and free, then it's going to have the chance to accept or reject God. Okay. Mr. Escobar?
So, are we saying that consciousness means you have a soul?
Consciousness means you have a soul, exactly. Consciousness is one of the signs that you have a soul, along with the 6 other proofs that we talked about in the second quarter. All right, so basically what we have to do is we have to recognize science as something legitimate and good, but we can't exclude other sources of knowledge. And this is because science can never answer why and can never answer ought. So why something is or how something ought to be are questions that science simply can't even try to answer. Mr. Grimm?
A long time ago, one of the earlier chapters, we talked about how a long time ago they thought that trying to learn about science could have been a sin.
Yeah.
Is there any truth to that at all?
No, because their way of understanding science back there was that a spirit moved everything. And so they actually thought that learning science was kind of delving into other gods and could be against the first commandment. So studying science now is not an act of pride. It's okay to try to understand it. And that's because our vision of science and reality has changed. Only philosophy and theology can answer these questions. Science, whose competence extends to observable things but not to invisible realities, must therefore respect the jurisdiction of faith and reason. So you can be a good Catholic scientist and engineer as long as you realize that science and technology have limits. Now, this is stuff you guys already know, but it's something that you'll have to explain if you ever get into arguments with people about it. And the problem is most people just don't even think about why or ought. Against empiricism, so Locke, Berkeley, and Hume, how many of you in your history class have learned about these guys? I'm sure you have, right? And you've heard or you've learned about modern philosophy and all the confusion that it's caused. But see, it's this empiricism, which is also known as scientism, is self-defeating. Because if everything has to be scientifically verifiable, well, how do you scientifically verify that? You just can't.
With experiments.
Excuse me?
With experiments.
Yes, but will the experiment be able to show you that all knowledge is given to us through experiment? Do you see what I mean, Johnny? That's how it's self-defeating. That's how it's self-defeating. In the same way that moral relativity or any relativity of truth is self-defeating. The moment you say that all truth is relative, you're making an absolute statement, therefore defeating what you just said. And in physics, right, we're learning that the relativity of time and space is all because of the absoluteness light speed. So it's a self-defeating proposition. Empiricism claims to achieve certain knowledge apart from faith, yet implicitly is a belief. So a radical militant atheist believes that God doesn't exist. That's a faith. It's someone who is a radical, empiricist. Notice that, again, they're contradicting themselves because they have this belief that they can't prove. And that belief underlies their whole way of seeing reality. But in the end, it's still a belief. You could even go so far as to say that empiricists are using faith every day because, well, they believe in the news they read this morning. They believe in the history textbooks that they had in school. A lot of us are making acts of faith without even realizing it 100 times a day. Mr. Johnson.
Well, couldn't you just say that's because of like probability?
Yeah, you could say that. But then the point there is they can't empirically prove that probability. Do you know what I'm saying? Mr. Escobar?
You're talking about empiricists, are you saying that their faith is assumption?
Yeah, assumption. It's not really faith as we understand it, which is like a supernatural gift. So yeah, it's more like an assumption. So the jurisdiction of science, then. Science has a certain jurisdiction of its own in regard to observable things. Faith, whose competence extends to unseen realities but not to visible things, must therefore respect the jurisdiction of science. St. Augustine explained, faith may entail adjusting a particular interpretation of the Bible when empirical evidence, not mere theory, contradicts. And Augustine knew this because he knew that Genesis 1 through 3 was symbolic. And he knew that before, all of the scientific understanding we have now. What this says, though, is that just as science should not discredit faith and theology and philosophy, it should be the opposite either. Because there are extremists who are, Bible-believing Christians and are trying to be good people who actively discredit science. And actively discredit even directed evolution. And, they believe in the young earth and the creation in 6 days. And again, these are not bad people, but they're kind of taking it to the other extreme. Dustin, did you have a question?
Well, I was going to talk about the randomness of people who believe in creation in 7 literal days.
Yeah.
Is that wrong to believe? Because I know that that science going back there is speculative, but it's a whole lot more reasonable to accept directed evolution than to accept a creationist belief, I would think. So
I agree with you. But even though it seems to us that direct evolution is a better theory, it's still a theory. And a young Earth creationist who believes in the 6 days is not being a bad Catholic for believing that. Do you see what I mean, Justin?
That's okay.
It's okay. It can be accepted. You can be a good, holy, practicing Catholic and believe that it happened in the 6 days.
How about things that are much more certain, like how about geocentrists, who still believe that the Earth is the center of the solar system?
Well, they're not being bad Catholics, but they're being perhaps bad scientists, or they're not thinking well. Do you know what I mean? But that's a good question, though, because it brings up the fact that these are still theories. And what really matters for our faith is accepting the facts of Genesis, even though you're free to kind of believe what you want about how these things happened. Mr. Tran?
How wacky do your beliefs on science have to get?
Well, I don't know. Why don't you throw out some examples?
Flat Earth.
Look, if someone believes in the flat Earth, they're not a bad Catholic. They're not. they can probably be really holy and get to heaven. But just as someone can be a good Catholic and maybe, I don't know, a really bad basketball player, you know what I mean? Someone can be a good Catholic and really bad at history and science and stuff. So that, so that's what I would say there, Johnny. Yes, certainly. We shouldn't look down on young Earth creationists. We shouldn't judge as stupid any person who believes in a flat Earth. It's just that there can be errors that people have. You can even have wrong thoughts and understandings of things, but that doesn't make you a bad or unholy person. Mr. Decker?
Okay, but kind of along this, I feel like a lot of it comes from a sort of a lot of these people, yeah, it might be that they're not really caring about the science, but it also sometimes seems to come from a sort of fake pride that they have.
Yeah.
Where it's I don't need the science, I don't care, this is what my interpretation of the Bible is.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and if in that case, Justin, there is pride there, and so that could be sinful. I guess my point is that let's say that there isn't pride there. You've got a good person who's really believing in God and stuff, who might have mistaken ideas. Those mistaken ideas in themselves aren't the problem. The pride behind it could be a problem. Mr. Grimm?
But for more understanding of reality you have, it pretty much means the more capacity for holiness, right?
Yeah.
Not necessarily.
Well, you could say that. You could say it this way: the more you understand truth of any kind, scientific, mathematical, whatever, the more disposed you are to the eternal truths. So that's true. But you can still know the eternal truths and be holy in spite of your errors and defects in the other areas. See, the errors and defects in the other areas are never a good thing. They're not. In fact, they're always a kind of hindrance. But you can definitely still be a good and holy Catholic with those errors which are minor in comparison to other errors. So to kind of answer your question a little more fully, the more we know about any truth is going to help us. Kind of like if you have a nutritious diet, you're more likely to be healthy than if you have the fast food diet. Even though you could still be healthy with the fast food diet in spite of it, not because of it. Does that kind of make a little more sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like someone who's never really learned anything ever in their whole lives.
like
I mean, obviously you have to learn something just by being alive. But it'd be harder for them to get to heaven.
It would. Someone who is extremely ignorant, it's harder for them to get to heaven because even the basic truths of our faith are going to be hard for them to understand. Okay. Ms. Tariki? It does in most cases. Well, it's not that they lack intelligence, it's that they lack the ability to process information in a normal way. Okay. If you think about what intelligence really is, intelligence is being able to apprehend a good, and will is being able to choose that good. And in that sense, they're not disabled at all. Okay, a disabled person, mentally disabled, can still have a very refined ability to apprehend the good in any situation, and that's intelligence. Do you see what I'm saying? Yeah. So we need to distinguish between information processing and intelligence in the spiritual sense. All right. Faith, its jurisdiction, faith in the Bible, church revelation, governs or has jurisdiction over truth. So think about it this way: science is kind of the ruling judge when we're talking about visible things, and faith is the ruling judge when we're talking about invisible things. And it makes sense. The problem is when you start to deny anything invisible, which itself is an act of faith. because there's no way to prove it. In the end, faith is still a gift from God. I told you guys this in the first week of class. We're never going to prove beyond the shadow of any doubt the things we believe. Faith is still faith. It's a gift that comes to us from God at baptism, and which we receive in every moment of our lives that we're in grace, of course. And there's even some faith, if you ever fall out of grace briefly, come back. Faith can still be there. But the point is that faith is always given to us. It's not something that we produce. Now, there are militant atheists out there. You guys have heard of some of these guys. I'm actually reading this guy's book right now because, you gotta sometimes read the thoughts of the enemy so that you know how to answer it. That's why John Paul II used to read Karl Marx. And someone asked him in seminary, why are you reading that guy? It's terrible. Same thing. You got to read what the enemy writes. But you know what? The thing is, it's a joke. It's pseudoscience. You can tear through every page of these books and just find error after error after error. But why do these books sell? Why do you guys think? What? It's got a good title. Why else? Mr. Zampiello.
There's a lot of other things. It just kind of tells people what they want to hear.
What they want to hear. And people want to hear this stuff because there's this idea that God limits our freedom. And so let's break off the shackles of faith in God and let's just believe he doesn't exist. Mr. Trent.
There's a group of people trying to push this.
Oh, that's for sure. And that group of people trying to push this notion, they've been really active in the last century. Miss Griffin?
Is there any arguments in the book for you that, like, if you were in an argument and someone were to bring that up, you would have difficulty defending?
No, it's a joke. It's 100 or so pages of joke. But the thing is, you do actually need the stuff I taught you in this class to be able to refute it. But you wouldn't need anything outside of this class to refute every single page in these two books. And yet, they sell. That's sad. They sell because in the end, faith isn't so much about which arguments make sense and stuff like that. It's about what people want. Now, we want to go to heaven. We want to love God. We want to believe, and that's why we're learning to back up our beliefs. But, you see, you're not going to win arguments against people who don't want to believe. They're not going to concede. And yet, when we argue with them, we can still plant seeds that hopefully the Holy Spirit can bring to fruition in the future. That's what should give us hope. Okay? And even though we're few, you think SMA, a tiny little school, what difference can SMA make in the world? Well, what did 12 apostles do? 12 is an even smaller number. See, it's not about numbers, guys. If God's working through you, then you can take the place of 10, 20, 30, 100 people. It's all about letting God work through you. Faith is the great cop-out. This is what Dawkins said in his joke book. The great excuse to evade the need to think and evaluate evidence. Faith, being belief that isn't based on evidence, is the principal vice in any religion. Ask me if he's ever read a page of the Summa. No. He is a specialized PhD who thinks he knows everything and doesn't know diddly. But see, that's the problem. The problem is we are in a world that's hostile to faith. And these are the kinds of people that we're going up against. Will Provine says this, modern science directly implies that the world is organized strictly in accordance with deterministic principles or chance. There are no purposive principles whatsoever in nature. There are no gods and no designing forces rationally detectable. So he says this as he sits down with the purpose of writing something. And so, does he have no purpose as he writes? If he has no purpose as he writes, well, why is he going to write at all? And he's also denying the fact that every other instance of human behavior we have, and even animal behavior, indicates purpose. Mr. Zampiello.
So I fail to see how this makes sense.
It doesn't.
Why do we have rules and like punishment if people can't be held accountable for it? After all, it's random, right? So where's the logic?
Exactly. There is no logic. It's complete nonsense. But it sounds good, written by some supposedly educated person, and therefore, the people who don't want to believe seize on this stuff and say, "Hey, I've got this great author backing me up." Mr. Grimm.
Faith is always a jump, right? And it's always, God is never going to give us like everything we need to make it obvious to the whole world.
Yes. Well, he may. You know, there are people who've had revelations.
And yeah,
It could happen to you.
but to everyone, he could.
Okay.
But why do we try to make it easier for everyone else to make that move?
What do you mean by making it easier for them?
Like the whole purpose of apologetics class, trying to show truth to others.
Well, let's back that up, or let's talk about that. Purpose of apologetics class is actually twofold. The thing about explaining to others is an important one, but I think even more important is convincing ourselves. So think of it this way, Leon. We already believe this stuff, but the more arguments we learn to back up our beliefs, the stronger our faith becomes. We're basically giving God a human help so that his gift of faith will take stronger root in us. Remember what the apostles said to Jesus? We believe, Lord, help our unbelief. Even the apostles realized that their faith needed strengthening. Every one of us in this room could have a slightly stronger faith and keep growing in that. Apologetics gives us human helps and reasonable, rational helps to strengthen our faith, which then which can help us to explain it to others. Does that, or is there a deeper question?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. But
Okay.
it seems like, well, for now, we don't know what God's plan is.
Uh-huh.
But for now, he wants it to be hard to have faith.
He wants it to be our choice to accept faith or reject it.
And naturally, it is hard.
Exactly.
So what is or should we try, I mean, obviously, should we try to make it easier for other people?
Yes, by all means. We should try to make it easier for other people to make that jump. Because let's suppose that someone's kind of weak in their faith, but they're open. And they don't have faith, but they would like to have it. When they learn the 7 ways, or anything else in this course, that's not going to be the same as giving them faith, but it then encourages them to make that jump. Do you know what I'm saying? And they'll be more encouraged to make that jump than someone who's never been exposed to the arguments. Here's a good analogy. I'm glad you brought up leap of faith. Let's say that you're going to go parachute out of a plane. And the parachute is rated at 99.9% effectiveness. Okay. And, people just jump. There's still that 0.1% chance that, okay. But people jump because they believe that it's a good parachute, and many others have done it. And so they take the leap. Now, it's not a great analogy because I'm not saying that we're 99.9% certain that God exists and all that stuff. No, it's 100%, but it's 100% because of a supernatural gift that he's given us. Still, though, if we can convince people that it's 99.9 or close, people who are shaky, that's going to help them to take the jump. And remember, too, that taking the jump isn't just something I decide, oh, yeah, I'm going to have faith. God has to give the person faith, and the person then needs to accept it. Okay. Was there another hand that I saw? Mr. Solomon?
Yeah. I don't know why. I think that might want to get something.
Yes.
So if one has the, so let's just say that Joe Schmo, you're talking to Joe Schmo, and he's like, oh, well, I'm open, talk to me. And maybe this is false type, maybe this is false type, but like, he's willing to accept Christianity,
Yes.
but not Catholicism. So if you were between the option to talk to Joe Schmo and get him Christian, or to talk to Joe Schmo and he'll become Christian, or to make him, or try to go for the gold and make him Catholic, but you don't know or not if he'll. Because he's like, oh yeah, I go to I go to Baptist church with my friends. I'm just not really sure or whatever. So you can go for the gold, but you don't know what should you do.
Yeah, I think making him Christian is the intermediate step. And the reason I say that is because that's what Yahweh did with the Israelites. He didn't say, these are the Christian facts, and this is what you should do: love your neighbors yourself, pray for your enemies. They had to work up to that. So I think in that case, it's better to get someone to be Christian first rather than non-Christian, and then maybe with that progress. Does that make sense, Michael?
Yeah.
Okay. If you try to go for the gold right away, you might risk that person not accepting anything. Okay. All right. Those who devote themselves. This is Alfred North Whitehead. He's not Catholic, but he's a Christian philosopher. Those who devote themselves to the purpose of proving that there is no purpose constitute an interesting object for study, meaning that those people make no sense. All right. And it's a good way to put it, because he's right. They are actually bent on something, but are contradicting themselves as they do it. Competent truth-seeking scientists know that God is a more reasonable explanation for the universe than random chance. So this is why I keep saying, beginning of every class, faith is reasonable. We're not saying that faith is the only answer. We're saying it's the best answer. And we that have the gift of faith can back up our beliefs with arguments. Isaac Newton said this supremely exquisite structure that is visible to us, comprising the sun, the planets, and the comets, could come into being solely through the decision and under the dominion of an intelligent and powerful, truly existing being. He steers everything not as a world soul, but as the Lord of all things. And he wrote this in Principia Mathematica, in which he talks about classical mechanics and calculus. But the reason I want to finish this topic with Isaac Newton is because he's a great example of an excellent scientist who realized that the more reasonable explanation for the universe is God, and a much less reasonable explanation is random chance. Okay. The world that we are going into can choose between belief in God or rejection of God. But we, like Leon was saying, we can make it easier for them to choose faith if we can make them see that faith is reasonable. We make it harder for them to choose faith if we can't show them that faith is reasonable. In the end, it's still faith. Does that make sense, guys? Okay.